Welcome to my show, Searching for Integrity. My name really is John Smith, and I'm searching for people with integrity. Why? Because our country suffers from IDD, integrity deficit disorder. We have Mary Beth Albright today, author, and I do believe she brought her book. It's titled Eat and Flourish, How Food Supports Emotional Well-Being. I must confess, I learned a lot of things in going through this that I didn't know. And I'm going to fill in the other parts, but welcome to my show.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm thrilled that you learned things that you didn't know, because I have to say, this science has really exploded over the past 2 decades. And we know so much more about our bodies and our brains and how they interact with food now than we did even 10 years ago. So I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
That's good. Thank you for being here. You know, I spent a lengthy period of time in my life doing marathons, and I didn't realize what I was doing then. Looking for all the things that helped me go fast, the things that would help me avoid injury, those types of things. Nevertheless, something I've got here for you. Do you still write for the Washington Post?
I do. I'm a correspondent and editor at the Washington Post, and a lot of the work that I've been doing there is focused around food and mental health. And I will tell you that I ran exactly 1 marathon. That was enough. I did. I knew I could do it, and then I never did it again. So I think it's great that you ran marathons, and I hear you that we really focus on the history of my life has been focused on food for things like weight loss and for things like fueling a run and stuff like that. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, because there's so much science behind how our guts and our brains interact. And it was, to me, a really freeing message to say you can eat healthily for your emotional well-being, and it doesn't have to be focused on body and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Well, I want to get into some more of this and that a little bit later on. It's for me, I like it because I just a week ago subscribed to the Washington Post.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for supporting independent journalism. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I'm in Arizona now. So I used to be in Texas. Spent most of my adult life. And I'm learning right here. If you look at, I guess, the diverse microbiome.
Microbiome, yeah, you got it.
Microbiome, okay. That was going to reduce inflammation. If it was inflammation, we'd give it to Joe Biden. And in looking at this, the inflammation, I thought in my head, what does a boxer do when he gets his face beat up the whole time, and they come away with all kinds of inflammatory problems?
Yeah. So what's interesting about inflammation is that we have these examples in our minds, like what you're talking about, that when we get something hurt on our body, it gets inflamed. It is always, inflammation is our immune system being activated. So if you think about it in a less extreme example, if you just cut your finger gets swollen, it gets hot to the touch, it gets engorged with blood, and that is your immune system calling to action and helping your body heal. And what we thought about inflammation before is that the brain was protected from inflammation. There's something called the blood-brain barrier. And we thought until about like 20 or 30 years ago, we thought that blood-brain barrier was impermeable. You couldn't get anything past it. And now we know that the blood-brain barrier is made up of tightly packed together cells. And so little things can get past that blood-brain barrier and into the brain. So to give an example about inflammation, when you have inflammation anywhere in your body, it could be in your big toe. If you have inflammation anywhere in your body, the body releases inflammatory compounds into your blood. And those inflammatory compounds are small enough to get through the blood-brain barrier. And so inflammatory compounds and inflammation anywhere in the body can get to your brain and wreak havoc with mental health and with emotional well-being. And the inflammation can also happen from the food that we eat. So sometimes your body can see the ultra-processed foods that a lot of us really enjoy, fat and sugar bombs, they're very tasty, but you ingest them and your body gets inflamed in response to it. And then that goes to your brain as well. So it can be a vicious or a virtuous cycle depending on the food that we choose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I understand that completely. One thing, though, that I don't understand is how the inflammation, it's more of an entry of what you read was eating fermented food, legumes, lots of produce, and eat with another. That seems to be a drill.
Yeah. So the book is focuses on 4 different things with all of the research in the past 20 years. The evidence shows that there are 4 things that you can focus on to improve your emotional well-being through food. One of them we already talked about, inflammation. Another one, which you're getting at, is the gut microbiome. These are 2 separate things, but the body is a system, so they're interrelated, as is everything in the body. The body is more than just a container of parts. It is a system and an ecosystem, and we have to feed it good things for it to work correctly. Now, the gut microbiome is the collection of trillions of microbes that exist all along your digestive tract, and that goes from your mouth all the way to the other end. And the microorganisms are bacteria, they're fungi, they're viruses, and those bacteria can do things that our body can't do on its own. For example, the microbes in us can turn food into short chain fatty acids, and those short chain fatty acids can really help with our emotional health. But you have to have enough of the beneficial microbes inside of you to have that reaction happen. And if you don't have the beneficial microbes, you might have harmful microbes inside of you, and those can come from food as well. So my favorite example of this is tryptophan. We all hear about tryptophan in turkey, right? We just got past Thanksgiving, and tryptophan indeed can cause a feeling of well-being, a feeling of sleepiness. And that's because certain microbes in our digestive system can turn tryptophan into serotonin. Now, there are other microbes that take tryptophan and turn it into things that are not good for our emotional well-being. And so it really depends. Again, we see that the body is a system, and you have to feed that gut microbiome fiber, whole grains, whole foods, produce, for it to really turn the good food that you put into it into wonderful things.
Right. Especially Thanksgiving Day.
Sure.
I wonder, where and when did we start believing to trust our gut?
I mean, it's a great question. To me, and this is going, to sort of humanities of it rather than the hard evidence-based science. To me, I think humanity has always had that idea. I mean, if you look back at philosophers writing millennia ago, you'll see that there was an idea of a gut sense, of a gut feeling. And what we know about that now, and what we can see through the evidence, is that there is, in fact, a gut-brain loop. It's a loop that goes back and forth between your gut and your brain, and it sends messages back and forth. Your brain sends messages to your gut, and your gut sends messages to your brain. And a lot of what they say to each other depends on the quality of food that you put into it. And that's really one of the theses of the book, which is what you eat affects how you feel, And what you feel affects how you eat and how you experience the food. And so that's what we're really trying to get at when we eat for emotional well-being.
Well, I looked the up and down, and I believe in it. I used to take the omega-3s, but they always tasted so bad, I just didn't want to taste them. But now that I've read this, my wife said, they have lemon flavored now. So I got a whole bottle, big bottle now.
Yeah, I take the lemon flavored ones too. I'm not a huge fan of supplements generally because everything you need is from the food system. It is just right there in food. That said, I don't eat enough fatty fish, and I know that. And now that I've gone to people's labs all over the world, and I have seen the effect that omega-3 fatty acids, particularly DHA and EPA, can have on our neuron connections. It is shocking. And this is using photon microscopes that have only been developed over the past decade or so. And so you can really see how food can help strengthen those neuron connections. So I do, because I don't have enough fatty fish, I do take an omega-3 supplement, and I take a vitamin D supplement in the winter because, we all need more vitamin D.
And some zinc.
Yes, zinc. There's some really interesting evidence that people who have clinical depression, it's often associated with a deficiency in zinc, which is not to say eat some zinc, you'll be fine. Like all of the stuff that I bring up in this book, it's a tool in our mental health toolbox. We also have medications, which are life-saving and wonderful and help with human flourishing. We also have talk therapy, which is incredibly important. Cognitive behavioral therapy. I mean, the list goes on and on. This is just another evidence-based way. Food is another evidence-based way to help your mental health. And that's like the critical message right now that we need to get out, because we are in a global mental health crisis. And at the same time, we're in a crisis of an epidemic of loneliness. The US Surgeon General has said that. And loneliness, it shows that loneliness has the same decrease in lifespan as, I think it's 10 or 15 cigarettes a day. And all of this evidence, all of these things, the loneliness and isolation and that kind of thing, we can commune around food. And that's part of the science that I bring up in the book too.
I like the chapter 1, emotional eating. Can you elaborate on that?
Oh, sure. The biggest takeaway that I got from the decades of research is all eating is emotional eating. We conflate emotional eating with negative things like, oh, I was sad, so I ate a pint of ice cream, right? Which of course, not beneficial for long-term emotional health. But the most important thing that we can see is that food and emotions are entwined. They're entwined like vines, and they're inseparable. And we can either get to know this connection between our food and our mood and how it's biologically based and how we can use it for our benefit, or we can deny that it exists and just be like, oh, I'm not an emotional eater. I can't eat. There are biological reactions that happen that affect your emotions when you eat anything, literally anything. And so I think coming back to the idea that all eating is emotional eating, so let's use it, to me was a very freeing message.
Now, how do brains experience pleasure from food?
Yeah, well, this was one of the most interesting things that I had looked at was that all of the pleasure circuitry in the brain, all pleasures use the same brain circuitry. It can be sex, it can be great music, it can be fantastic food, it can be a great glass of wine. It all uses the same circuitry in the brain, the pleasure circuitry. And I devoted the entire second chapter of the book to food pleasure, because I think it's really important. We often think of eating for health as separate from pleasure, and in fact, it's all one and the same. And so that chapter of the book is about how we can increase our food pleasure without turning to the fat and sugar bombs that are ultra processed food. And a lot of it is neuroscience. A lot of it is tricks that chefs have used for since the beginning of restaurants, a couple hundred years ago, or many hundred years ago, along the Silk Road. But since the beginning of restaurants, chefs have known, if when you use heavier cutlery, if you eat the same meal and you eat it one time with heavy cutlery and one time with light cutlery, you will rate the heavy cutlery meal as better, always, invariably, because that's a trick that our brain plays on ourselves. We have heavy cutlery, so we perceive it to be higher quality. Or when you eat something on a round plate, your brain processes it as sweeter tasting than if you eat it off a rectangular plate. We don't know everything about why the brain does this, but we do know that it happens. And so rather than waiting, we're not going to know in my lifetime everything about the brain. I don't think in anyone's lifetime who is listening to this, we're not going to know everything about the brain, but we do know that these things happen and we can use them to our advantage. So that's food pleasure is extraordinarily important. And it's important to remember that pleasure is a form of nourishment, particularly if you are someone who is struggling with emotional well-being. Food pleasure can be really wonderful. And so how do we access it and how do we amplify it? And importantly, I wrote this book for everyone. It's not just for people with a diagnosed mental disorder or diagnosed depression or that kind of thing. I think right now we're all in a state that we could use a little help with our emotional well-being. Sure. So this book is for everyone. Yeah.
No doubt about that. No doubt about that. I've got, there's a connection, and I think that you mentioned it, the brain and the gut connect. Now, where's the connection? Is there a wire in there somewhere?
Well, there kind of is. It's called the vagus nerve, and it's a bundle of nerves that go directly from the gut all the way up to the brainstem. That's not the only way that the gut and brain connect, but we do know that the vagus nerve has a lot to do with our emotional well-being, and that goes back hundreds of years. And now that they're doing studies regarding the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve is activated during mindfulness. And it's also activated when you're doing repetitive cooking, like kneading bread, for example. There's actually a whole discipline regarding this called breaditation, like making bread and meditating at the same time, because it's that repetitive action. And we talk about that in the book a lot. But yeah, the vagus nerve is one of them. And there's also a gut sense. So we're not sure how this happens, but when food is injected directly into the gut, and I'm not through the mouth, not chewing up or anything like that, you're just injecting food directly into the gut sends the brain signals about what's in it, whether there's sugar in it, whether there's fat in it, whether it's had enough. And that happens completely separate from the food pleasure that we get when it goes through the mouth. So there are a lot of different gut senses happening. Again, we don't know how it all works, but we do know that the answer is eating a whole food diet.
Very interesting. At first, I thought there was a blackjack table somewhere. With Vegas.
Oh, the Vegas nerve. Yeah. Well, what happens in Vegas does not stay in Vegas. I'll tell you that. What happens in Vegas in the body goes all over the place.
Yeah, I can see that. The immune system and the emotional well-being. I've known people that were sick all the time, and that you try to help, and they say, "Oh no, you can't help me." That seems a lot of depression, but nevertheless, I think it's rolled into a particular same.
Well, the way that emotions affect our body, it can result in inflammation. So, for example, you hear a lot about how the way that our bodies operate and the way that the world runs right now is an evolutionary mismatch. So you have a terrible boss, and you're sitting in a meeting with your terrible boss and you are getting angry. And that anger is calling up adrenaline and cortisol in your body, because historically, when we were angry, we usually had to fight someone off. And now you shouldn't fight your boss off, okay? Not physically anyway. So you have all this cortisol and adrenaline in your body and it has nowhere to go. That can cause inflammation, which again can cause emotional well-being issues if those inflammatory compounds get into your brain. So a big part of eating for emotional well-being is also understanding your emotions and being in touch with those emotions. And there's recommendations in the book about how to do that, but also the physical effects that emotions can have on our nutritional needs. There is a really interesting study that studies the urine of stressed people and finds that there's an excess of magnesium in their urine, which leads people to believe that that using magnesium is used by the body in processing stress. And so you may need to replenish that magnesium after you've had a particularly stressful time, which is not to sort of conflate or deflate food into just a bunch of nutrients. Because I'm, as we've discussed, I'm really against that, because I'm really for food pleasure and what people enjoy eating. But it's also good to know these biological reactions and how you can use food to support yourself.
Let's talk a little bit about processed food.
Mm-hmm.
How bad is it?
Ultra processed food is one of the most devilishly problematic things that we can eat as an eating pattern. Now, look, ultra processed food comes in many different forms, and that's why it gets confusing. What's good? What's bad? That kind of thing. Think of the things that are traditionally thought of: potato chips, like fried things and not home fried. We're talking like, industrially fried and mass produced foods. And the evidence shows that those foods, as your eating pattern, can wreak havoc on your emotional well-being. And that when people who have ultra-processed foods as their basis of their eating pattern change that eating pattern, their depressive symptoms can go into remission and anxiety symptoms can go into remission. And that's just what the studies show. So, we can't live in a world with unprocessed food. We can't, put it back in the box, put the genie back in the bottle. But we can know that an eating pattern of ultra processed foods can be a problem, whereas an eating pattern of more whole foods, and then you can enjoy an ultra processed food, on occasion, that's really what's best for our emotional well-being. And to me, that was a great message, because I'm not perfect and I will never be perfect. And sometimes I enjoy an ultra processed food. I mean, I think many of us do. And so the fact that it doesn't need to be perfection, I think, is a great message also for people who might have emotional struggles too.
In the ending chapter 6, How to Eat for Emotional Well-Being, you've got week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. Microbiome, inflammation, nutrients, and pleasure. Are those exercises to be done? Are they supposed to take care of yourself during those times?
Yeah, well, I got to the point of finishing all the research and pulling it together. And then I realized this book has so much rich information, but I wanted to make sure that it's written for people who just also want to know what the takeaway is. How do I live given all of this science, and given that we're not going to know a lot about why it works, and there's not going to be a pill that comes out to do all these things for ourselves. So what I did was I also, as I have mentioned, am very much against restrictive diets. So I thought to myself, there's a 4-week plan, and each week focuses on one of the 4 things that I found from the research really affect eating for emotional well-being. And that is pleasure. I mean, the first week of a 4-week plan is focusing on your food pleasure. I mean, come on, you can do that, right? And then the microbiome, and then inflammation, and then we go on to nutrients. And nutrients, as I said, I don't like to just turn it's called nutritionism. People who just turn food into like, what vitamins are they, right? But we go into things like, so for example, nuts, that a lot of people stay away from nuts because they think that they are high in fat and calories. And yes, that is true. But nuts also have a lot of vitamin E in them. And vitamin E is a fat soluble vitamin. And so when in the inside of the nut, you have both the vitamin E and the fat you need to actually absorb the vitamin E. So, the food system is perfect. We're just not using it. We're going back to the ultra processed foods, and we consider having a Snickers bar eating nuts, but no shade on Snickers bars. Love Snickers bars, but it's that 4-week plan, I think, really takes the science and brings it into actionable steps.
Right. Well, it's been a pleasure having you to my audience today. I'd want to thank you for joining us here and there and everywhere, hopefully enough. And would you like to let people know where they can buy your book?
Sure, you can buy it anywhere. You can buy it at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, independent bookstores. It's available wherever books are sold. My website is marybethalbright.com. It has my work from the Washington Post and National Geographic, and some videos there, quick cooking videos. I'm on Twitter at Mary Beth, and I'm on Instagram at mary.beth.
Okay, I got it. One last thing. I was reading in here, you have a 10-year-old son. His name is Truman.
Yeah.
And he wanted to field a question about baseball.
No, it's so funny. He's actually, he's a little bit older than that now, and he does love baseball, and he's played since he was 3. And really a big fan.
Well, you'll have to take it home with you. Ask him who broke the home run record this year for the Yankees.
Oh, he will absolutely know that. I will ask him when he gets home from school, and he will absolutely know that.
Okay, that's great. Well, thanks again for being our guest. It's been a real treat.
Thank you so much, John. I appreciate the time.
Sure. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to Searching for Integrity. So long, and happy trails to all.